Here is a question, and I want you to sit with it honestly before you answer. When was the last time you questioned something a government told you and actually felt safe doing it out loud? Not online, not behind a username. Out loud, to people you know, at work, at a family dinner, in a conversation that could be traced back to you. If there was even a flicker of hesitation before you answer that, it is not paranoia. It is a signal worth paying attention to. Because here is the uncomfortable idea this entire video is built around. Religion did not disappear from modern society. It did not fade out as science and democracy rose up. It shapeshifted. The institutions changed. The symbols changed. The language changed. But the psychological structure beneath all of it, the all-knowing authority, the moral code handed down from above, the punishment for doubt and the reward for loyalty, that structure is more alive than ever. It just found a new home. It moved into government. Now before you click away thinking this is some anti-government rant or a conspiracy spiral, stay with me. This is not about left or right, conservative or liberal, east or west. This is about something far older than political parties. It is about a pattern buried deep in human psychology that keeps repeating itself across centuries. And once you see it, you genuinely cannot unsee it. To understand what governments have absorbed, you first need to understand what religion actually did for people. Not what it believed, what it provided. For thousands of years, religion gave human beings 4 things almost impossible to live without. A story about how the world works, a clear moral framework, a community that shared both, and most critically, an authority beyond question, something larger than yourself to which you could surrender your uncertainty. That last part matters more than people admit, because the human brain is not built to handle unlimited open questions. Psychologists call this the need for cognitive closure, a fundamental human drive to reach a definite answer, rather than sit indefinitely in ambiguity. When life throws you chaos, disease, death, poverty, injustice, the mind desperately wants someone or something to explain it, contain it, and promise there is a plan. Religion, for most of human history, was that container. Then something significant happened. The Enlightenment, industrialization, scientific advancement, and eventually the digital age began dismantling institutional religious authority. Church attendance collapsed. Trust in religious institutions fell to historic lows. In countries like the Czech Republic, the Netherlands, and across Scandinavia, people identifying as non-religious became the majority demographic for the first time in recorded history. The secular optimists believed this was progress, and in many ways it was. But they made one catastrophic assumption. They assumed that when religion left, the psychological needs it served would leave with it. They did not. Think about what actually happens when people leave organized religion. They rarely become indifferent to big questions. They migrate toward political ideologies, wellness movements, social causes, activism. Not because those things are wrong, but because the psychological slot that religion occupied does not simply disappear when the institution weakens. Something else fills it. The container changes. The need does not. And across society, the institution that filled that slot most completely, most structurally, most permanently was the modern state. Here is where it gets genuinely strange. Every major religion in history has had rituals, and not because ancient people were primitive or superstitious. Rituals do something psychologically powerful. They create belonging. They mark sacred time. They transform abstract belief into something physical, something you can see, repeat, and share with others. They answer the deepest question a social animal can ask. Which group do I belong to? Now ask yourself what modern states have. They have national anthems sung in unison, audiences rising, hand over heart, eyes often closed. They have flags treated with a reverence that borders on the sacred, with formal protocols governing how they must be folded, displayed, and protected from desecration. They have founding documents stored in temperature-controlled vaults, displayed under bulletproof glass, referenced in political speech with a tone that sounds less like legal citation and more like scripture. They have state funerals that function almost identically to religious ceremonies, complete with processions, eulogies about sacrifice and legacy, and the elevation of ordinary individuals into symbolic martyrs. The French sociologist Émile Durkheim argued in the early 20th century that what religion actually worships, beneath all the theology, is not God. It is society itself, the community, the collective, and the rituals are simply how the group reaffirms its own existence and its own power. By that logic, modern states are not secular alternatives to religion. They are religion. They worship the nation the way ancient communities worship their tribal gods as the highest source of meaning, the ultimate judge of right and wrong, and the final claim on individual sacrifice. Here is the test. In many countries, refusing to stand for a national anthem is treated not as a legal violation, but as a moral crime, a betrayal. The line being crossed is not legal. It is sacred. And that, by any honest definition, is a religious boundary, even if nobody calls it that. But the rituals are just the surface. The deeper structure is where it gets truly alarming. Every religion has a moral code, rules that arrive not as negotiable suggestions but as final authority. What makes these codes powerful is not just their content, it is that they are handed down. They carry a finality that places them beyond ordinary human debate. Pay close attention to how governments communicate during moments of collective crisis, during pandemics, economic collapses, wars. The language changes. It stops being the language of democratic deliberation, the careful weighing of evidence, the acknowledgement of trade-offs, the genuine invitation to disagree. It becomes something that sounds uncomfortably like commandment. Follow the science. There is no alternative. You are either with us or against us. These phrases, pulled from opposing political contexts and clashing ideologies across different decades, share one thing. They are not arguments, they are moral pronouncements. Question them, and you are not just wrong, you are dangerous, you are selfish, you are a threat to the community. Hannah Arendt, one of the 20th century's most important political thinkers, argued that authoritarian tendencies succeed not primarily through force, but through the construction of a moral universe where obedience becomes virtue and dissent becomes sin. You do not need a totalitarian state to activate that mechanism. You need a large enough crisis, a media environment capable of amplifying authority and shaming doubt, and citizens frightened enough to prefer certainty over truth. What makes this more alarming today is the engine now enforcing it. Social media. Platforms algorithmically reward outrage and amplify conformity. What once required a state broadcaster or a pulpit to enforce, now spreads peer-to-peer, instantly, at global scale. You are no longer just afraid of the government's disapproval. You are afraid of your neighbors, your colleagues, your entire timelines. The congregation enforces its commandments in real time, and there is nowhere to hide from it. This pattern appears on every side of the political spectrum, in every era, in every corner of the world. It is not a partisan observation, it is a structural one. The mechanism belongs not to the left or the right, it belongs to power. And power, in any era, has always been tempted to borrow the psychological authority of the sacred. Every religious system needs intermediaries, people who stand between the divine authority and the ordinary person, translating, interpreting, and administering the moral code. In medieval Christianity, they were priests. In ancient Egypt, the priestly class held such interpretive power, they functioned effectively as a parallel government. Who plays that role today? The answer is not a class of conspirators. Most of the people in this role are genuine specialists doing genuinely important work. The epidemiologist during a health crisis, the economist during a financial collapse, the climate scientist interpreting decades of data, The problem is not the individuals. The problem is the structure surrounding them. These experts hold authority that ordinary citizens cannot independently verify or meaningfully challenge. And when the gap between expert knowledge and public understanding grows large enough, something telling happens. The nature of disagreement changes. When you question a mainstream scientific or political consensus, the response is rarely just, "Here is the data you are misreading." It shifts to, "You are putting people in danger." The challenge moves from intellectual to moral. Instantly, "You are not mistaken. You are harmful." That shift from wrong to sinful is exactly what happens inside religious communities when someone questions doctrine. And it functions the same way here, not to correct you, but to silence you. There is a profound difference between expertise that says, "Here is the evidence, here are the uncertainties, here is where reasonable people disagree," and expertise that says, "This question is settled and raising, it makes you a threat." The first serves democracy. The second quietly dismantles it. Here is where the parallel becomes genuinely eerie. Every major world religion has offered its followers some version of salvation, a promised state of perfection toward which believers are moving if they follow the rules, make the right sacrifices, and hold their faith. Heaven, nirvana, paradise. The details vary, but the function is always identical. It provides direction, explains why present suffering is acceptable, and gives the moral code its ultimate justification. Obey now, and the future will be radiant. Modern political systems across the entire ideological spectrum run on the exact same promise. The free market will eventually raise living standards for everyone. The revolution will produce a classless society. Technological progress will eliminate disease and scarcity. Democratic expansion will make war obsolete. The specific utopia varies by ideology. The structure of the promise never does. Sacrifice now. Trust the system. Follow the rules. Salvation, not in heaven but in history, is waiting. Political philosophers have a term for this: taking the religious idea of a perfect end of history and dragging it into the present, treating it as something achievable through the right politics, the right leader, the right system. The promise stops being about eternity. It becomes a promise about the next generation after the next election, once the right policies are finally in place. But it carries all the same psychological force as the religious original, including its most useful feature, a concept of sin. Because just as religions need sin to explain why paradise has not arrived yet, political systems have their mirror image: the unpatriotic, the irresponsible, the conspiracy theorist, the denier, the person who refuses to participate in the shared project of building the promised future. Their dissent is never merely inconvenient, it is immoral. It is the reason progress keeps getting delayed. The political dissident becomes the sinner, and when any movement of any ideology stops seeing itself as a practical arrangement for managing collective life and starts seeing itself as a vehicle for human redemption, the citizen is no longer a free individual whose rights the state exists to protect. They become, without ceremony, a member of a congregation, bound by its moral demands, indebted to its vision, expected to subordinate their judgment to the collective project. That transformation does not require a dictatorship. It only requires enough fear, enough promise, and enough patience. So if this pattern is real, the more important question is not why governments do this. Power-seeking sacred authority is about as surprising as water flowing downhill. The more important question is why ordinary, intelligent, critically thinking people keep accepting it. Part of the answer runs below the level of conscious thought. Psychologists have found that much of human social behavior is driven by the management of existential anxiety, the awareness of death, of chaos, of the fact that the universe is fundamentally indifferent to human suffering. This awareness is so destabilizing that the human mind requires shared meaning systems that make chaos feel ordered, suffering feel purposeful, and the individual feel protected by something larger than themselves. When those systems collapse, people do not simply become free and rational. They become anxious. And anxious people are extraordinarily receptive to any institution that offers clarity, moral direction, and a sense of collective protection, even when that institution's authority is not fully earned, even when the clarity it offers is simpler than the truth. The second part of the answer is structural. For generations, the institutions sitting between the individual and the state, the local community, the church, the union, the extended family network, absorbed much of this psychological pressure. They gave people belonging and identity that did not depend on the government. Those intermediate institutions have been hollowing out for decades. When they weaken, the state does not become one option among many. It becomes the only one left standing. You can actually hear this in how people talk about leaving intense political movements. They reach for religious language, deconversion, losing the faith, being cast out, feeling like an apostate. That language is not poetic. The psychological architecture is genuinely the same, and recognizing that is not a criticism of political engagement. It is a warning about what happens when political engagement stops being a civic act and starts being a substitute for something deeper. The technology that amplifies state authority has never been more powerful. The psychological infrastructure that once checked it has never been thinner. That is not an accident of history. It is the specific condition we are living in right now. This is an analysis, not a manifesto, but analysis without any direction is just an elegant dead end. The first thing worth doing is applying a simple test to any claim made by any institution. Can I see the evidence, and am I actually allowed to contest it? If the answer to either is no, you are not being asked to trust expertise. You are being asked to perform an act of faith. Keeping that distinction sharp is one of the most important habits a citizen in a modern democracy can develop. The second is learning to notice the emotional register of political language. There is a detectable difference between an institution that says, "Here is the evidence, here are the trade-offs, here is the dissent we considered," and one that says, "This is what good people do." The first is governance. The second is something else entirely. Training yourself to hear that difference in real time, especially during a crisis when the pressure to conform is at its peak, is difficult. It is also essential. And the third, invest in the intermediate, the local institutions, the community organizations, the civil spaces sitting between you and the state, not as nostalgia, but as structural protection. Where those buffers are healthy, the state's pull towards sacred authority weakens significantly. Where they collapse, that pull becomes nearly irresistible. At the beginning of this video, I asked you whether you felt safe questioning authority out loud. I want to return to that question now. The discomfort you may have felt, even just imagining it, is not a personal failing. It is the predictable response of someone who has absorbed without necessarily choosing to. The emotional logic of a system that has made dissent feel dangerous rather than democratic. None of this means governments are evil. That conclusion would be too simple, and simplicity here is dishonest. What it means is that the relationship between citizens and the state has quietly taken on a character that resembles, in its psychological architecture, the relationship between a congregation and its church. And throughout history, the concentration of moral authority and sacred status in any single institution, religious or secular, has reliably preceded the erosion of freedoms that citizens believed were permanent. We are living in a moment when that erosion is accelerating. Social media has made moral enforcement instantaneous and communal. intermediate institutions are weaker than they have been in generations. The language of salvation and sin has migrated into mainstream political speech with a visibility that grows more pronounced each year. The conditions that once made this pattern slow and visible have been replaced by conditions that make it fast and invisible. What is being described here is not a conspiracy, it is a pattern. Patterns do not require orchestration, they only require the conditions that make them inevitable. Noticing that is not rebellion, it is citizenship. And real citizenship has always required the willingness to ask the questions that the institution would prefer you didn't. So here is what I genuinely want to know. Have you experienced a moment where questioning authority, political, medical, institutional, any kind of authority, felt less like a democratic exchange and more like a religious one, where doubt felt not just mistaken, but dangerous? Leave that in the comments. It is exactly the kind of conversation that becomes more valuable the more people are willing to have it honestly. If this video made you think, even if it made you uncomfortable, share it with someone who will push back on it. That kind of disagreement is exactly what this video is asking you to protect. Subscribe if you want more. We are just getting started.